And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Taking a look at today's sea ice analysis, you can see open area here yesterday is filled in with at least some thin ice across the entire area there. And then heavier ice here to the south across the from coast to coast there continues to increase. And also here, Kotzebue Sound, north side of the Seward Peninsula, and eastern Norton Sound. So from there, taking a look at tonight's weather, that front coming across the Bering Sea washes out here along the coast and brings an area of light snow from St. Lawrence Island right down across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta into northern Bristol Bay. Mixed precipitation, light mixed precipitation for the Alaska Peninsula. It stays fair here. Kodiak Island up into south central Alaska and into the Kuskokwim Valley with light snow over the Copper River Basin down into the coast range there, and then along the immediate coast, rain and snow showers from Yakutat over toward Cordova, and a warm front spreading rain up into the Aleutians as this storm moves eastward there into Canada. And then for tonight, or for tomorrow, that low still hung up there along the coast just south of the Queen Charlotte Islands here with weak low off the coast of the Panhandle. So still some shower chances occurring over the southern southeast coast. Areas of snow here, mainly over the eastern Copper River Basin, up across the eastern Alaska Range there to about Eagle. Fair in the interior from the North Slope all the way down to Cook Inlet. And this front, some leftover moisture. There are some flurries of light snow showers from the Kuskokwim Mountains, lower Yukon River Valley area on up into the Bering Strait, but very light amounts. And not so much light snow now along the Arctic coast. This system pulling wind and rain up into the southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Warm front spread some light rain into the Pribilofs and Alaska Peninsula in the afternoon. Then on Thursday, that low tracks northeastward into the southwest coast, bringing gusty winds, mixed precipitation with it, snow to the north, rain to the south here, precipitation pushing across Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island into southern Cook Inlet, snow into the southern Kuskokwim Valley. Stays fair in the north, but starting to see a little bit of an increase in the winds here along the Alaska Range to a little extent there back to the Seward Peninsula area, but not all that strong. And fair for the Panhandle. And from there, going to the coastal water forecast here, north to northwest winds on the south coast 15 knots, central coast north to northwest at 20 knots, east winds 15 knots for the north coast. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, Stevens Passage, north winds tomorrow at 20 knots, 4-foot seas, north at 15 for Clares Strait. And then for Thursday, inside waters here, looking at north winds 10 to 15 knots with 2 to 3 foot seas. South coast, west to northwest winds 15 to 20 knots, and the north coast, east winds at 20 knots. And then for Prince William Sound, small craft advisories for Wednesday, north winds 25 knots. North winds 25 to 30 knots there with higher gusts for the eastern North Gulf Coast, north at 30 on the western North Gulf Coast, and northwest winds at 30 knots for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. Cook Inlet, light north to northeast breeze at about 10. And then for the day on Thursday, pick those winds up in Cook Inlet, especially south of the Forelands, where there's a small craft advisory for northeast winds at 25 knots. East-northeast winds here, Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay at 30 knots. Small craft advisories for the North Gulf Coast. East winds, or east to northeast winds, 25 to 30 knots, and southeast at 20 for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, west winds at 25 Wednesday. Alaska Peninsula, south to west winds at 20 to 30 knots, and west at 20 for Bristol Bay. Outlook for Thursday, 30-knot winds out of the west and southwest for the Alaska Peninsula. Bristol Bay, southwest at 30, and southwest to southeast winds for Kodiak Island at 25 to 30 knots. For the western Aleutians, we've got north winds there, 25 knots west of Kiska Island, east of the island there across Kamchatka, east to southeast at 30 to 35 knots, and then good gales here for Wednesday for the, especially for Atka Island eastward here in across the eastern Aleutians for 35 to 45 knot winds. And then for the day on Thursday, west of Adak, we've got west to southwest winds at 20 to 30 knots. Adak and Atka, west-southwest 25 knots. and west-southwest winds 25 to 30 knots for the eastern Aleutians. And for the southwest coast, we've got south to southwest winds of 15 knots in the forecast for Wednesday, southeast at 20 up there for St. Lawrence Island, east at 25 for Norton Sound, and for the Pribilofs, south winds 30 knots and southwest at 20 knots for St. Matthew Island. And then for the day on Thursday, Norton Sound, gale warnings, east winds 35 knots. St. Lawrence Island, east winds at 30 knots. And the Yukon Delta coast looking at northeast winds at 30 knots, north at 30 knots for St. Matthew Island, becoming west 30 knots for the Pribilofs. Gale warnings here for the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island for southeast winds at 40 knots with 8-foot seas. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, light east to northeast winds at about 10 knots. And for the central coast, east at 15 knots. Small craft advisories here for the western Arctic coast, east winds 25 knots. And for the Chukchi Sea, east to northeast winds at 15 to 20. And then for the Chukchi Sea on Thursday, east to northeast winds 20 to 25, east to 25 for the western Arctic coast, southeast 15 on the central coast, and the Beaufort Sea coast, or eastern Beaufort Sea coast, looking at east to northeast winds at 10.